Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. My name is Leon Zeitz, and as Emily mentioned, I'm a co-founder of the Climate Mental Health Network, which is a nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C. that launched in 2021 to address the mental health consequences of the climate crisis. And I think as we've all been experiencing this summer, the ever-presence of climate realities in our lives, I know New Hampshire experienced probably more wildfire smoke in Canada than most people can remember. So it is a relevant topic to today, and we're in a time where there's, I don't believe, a question that this climate crisis has mental health impacts. And so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Robert Fetter today, who recently retired from a 40-year career as a general adult psychiatrist in New Hampshire. He majored in psychology at the University of Michigan, went to medical school at the University of Washington, and completed a psychiatry residency at Yale. He has published in areas of substance use, affective disorders, anxiety disorders, and psychotic disorders. And Dr. Fetter is a board of directors member at the New Hampshire HWCA, as well as the chair of the Behavioral Health Working Group. He's also an active member in a number of climate-related groups, including the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, 350 NH, and No Coal, No Gas. He also has worked with the American Psychiatric Association as a representative to the Medical Society Consortium on climate and health. Dr. Fetter recently published a brief guide to individual therapy for climate-related mental distress and has given testimony to the Environmental Protection Agency and state legislators on the mental health effects of environmental pollution. In addition to working for greener energy, Bob enjoys singing, playing guitar, hiking, skiing, and boogie-boarding. So both doing impactful work and having fun outside. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to pass it over to you, Dr. Fetter.
Thank you very much for that gracious introduction, Leon. And thank you all for attending this talk today. When I was in high school, I took a course in public speaking, and my teacher there said it's always a good idea to start with a joke to kind of let the audience warm up to you and to get their attention. So I've tried to follow that advice over the years, but I got to tell you, it was hard coming up with a good joke about climate change. It's not really a very humorous topic, but I think I came up with something that will at least partially fit the bill. So I recently came across an article in the National Audubon Society magazine about Arctic terns. These birds have the longest migration path of all birds, migrating between the Arctic and the Antarctic twice a year. And research is showing that the terns have been profoundly affected by climate change. As their landmarks have disappeared due to loss of ice, some terns get stressed to the point of prematurely ending their flights. And experiments recently have shown that exposure to cannabinoids reduces stress levels in the stopped terns, allowing them to continue their journey. Teams are being formed to find the colonies of the stragglers and drop marijuana smoke bombs on the birds. The head of the project acknowledged that it was a huge undertaking, but vowed to leave no tern unstoned. Okay, well, now let's get to the serious part of the talk. I am going to try to share my screen here, which is generally not a small task, as most of you Zoomers probably know. Let me see what we got here. Okay, is that up there now?
Yep.
Okay, all right, good. So we're going to be talking about climate change and mental health. Now, climate change can affect mental health in one of two major ways. One is the direct effects of traumatic climate events on mental health. In other words, people that experience floods or fires and have impacts on their mental health because of these events. The other way climate is affecting mental health is by causing anxiety and pessimism among the general population, even among people who haven't been victims of significant climate effects yet. So we're going to examine both of these areas and in more detail and see how this actually plays out. So first, let's look at the direct effects of climate events on mental health. This can occur through a variety of ways, a variety of types of climate change events. The most obvious one is rising temperatures, people being exposed to excessive heat. Another very common one is severe storms, which we're experiencing more and more frequently now, which then can result in flooding. The opposite of that is occurring in some parts of the world where areas are being exposed to prolonged drought, which then results in famine. Forest fires are becoming more frequent, as we've certainly experienced this summer. Rising sea levels as a result of melting ice in the Arctic and Antarctic. And all of these things can also cause loss of human habitat, which forces migration and is another direct stress. We can look at some data on how these things directly affect mental health in some studies that have been done looking at this. First, in regard to increased temperature and heat exposure. The study done in 2020 looked at suicide rates around the world and correlated this with ambient temperatures and found that suicide rates increased by 1 to 2% for each 1 degree centigrade rise in ambient temperature. And it's predicted that by 2100, if things don't change in terms of the way they're going for global temperature increases, we will have a temperature increase of 8.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And you can do the simple math here in terms of what effect this is going to have on suicide rates. Also, looking at the effect of ambient heat, this is a study that was done across many different locations in the United States, looking at the rate of emergency room admissions for mental health issues. They basically just correlated the rates of these emergency room admissions with ambient temperature. And this graph is a little distorted because at the end where it's less than 75 degrees Fahrenheit, you don't really see much. The curve is pretty flat. But then when you start getting to around 25 degrees centigrade or around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, as things get warmer, the number of emergency room visits for mental health issues continues to rise. So there's a direct effect of heat on distress in people with mental health conditions. There was another study done in New York which tried to break this down by different diagnoses. So they looked at first at anxiety disorder, and again they saw a very similar thing. The curve is relatively flat until you get to temperatures around 25 degrees centigrade or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And then there's this very sudden linear increase in emergency room visits due to anxiety issues. They found a very similar thing for mood disorders, mostly depression, but also bipolar disorder. Again, the number of visits remains relatively flat until the temperature starts getting to around 70 degrees. And then as it gets hotter, the number of visits continues to go up. Similar findings for schizophrenia. Similarly for substance abuse. And generally the same thing for dementia as well, although the dementia curve starts rising much sooner. Not entirely clear why that is, but it certainly starts going up as the temperature rises as well. If you look at crime, there's also a similar relationship between crime and ambient temperature. This is a study that was done in Baltimore, and they looked at both total crime, which is the darker curve here, and violent crime. And both go up as the temperature goes up. And as crime goes up, the number of crime victims goes up, and these crime victims will often develop mental health conditions, including adjustment disorders, PTSD, and other conditions. Looking at hurricanes, FEMA has data from the first part of this century, and they found that suicide rates increased by 26% immediately following hurricanes. This was a study done on flooding in Great Britain, and they looked at the incidence of mental disorders 12 months after people were exposed to serious flooding events. And they found that the incidence of anxiety disorder, depression, and PTSD tripled to quadrupled what they usually are in baseline epidemiologic studies. So, flooding is a significant cause of increased incidence of mental disorder. Similarly, wildfires have an even more significant impact. This was a study, really a mega study, mega analysis done of 50 studies from Australia, Canada, and the United States, where the majority of wildfires have been occurring of late. And they found that 6 to 18 months after subjects experienced a significant wildfire event, the incidence of various psychiatric conditions was between 15 and 60%, which again is way higher than you normally would see in most epidemiologic studies. The usual, incidence of these conditions is, between 5 and 10% in most studies. There was another very interesting study done on the effect of migration and refugees that climate events have. These were two independent studies, one done by the United Nations Development Program and the other for the Institute for Economics and Peace. These are two, totally independent organizations, and they came up with almost identical findings that, based on, what was going on now, their prediction was that by 2050, up to 1 billion people per year would be displaced by various climate-related factors. And, to put this into perspective, the estimated population in 2050 is going to be about 10 billion on Earth. So that means 10% of the Earth's population is going to be displaced by 2050 due to climate-related factors if things continue to go the way they have been. Another way to look at this is, as of right now, there are 100 million displaced persons in the world from all causes. Most of these are war refugees, but there are also many victims of drought and other climatic events. So that, in 2050, the estimate is there's going to be 10 times as many refugees as there are now each year. And this is going to create tremendous mental health problems. The prevalence of various psychiatric disorders in refugee populations is quite high. Again, it's around 3 to 4 times what you see in baseline populations. And the incidence of completed suicide in refugees is extremely high, 50 to 100% higher than in native-born people. So there are tremendous significant effects of climate change on mental health. Looking at the other main category, which is the effect of climate change on people that haven't been victims of climate disasters yet, but are worried about what the future holds. This is, another situation that involves a tremendous amount of people. Yale and George Mason both have large climate departments, and they get together and do a poll every year on various climate-related issues. And The results of their most recent one just came out last month, and they asked a large group of American adults, which was supposed to be representative of the general American population in terms of geography and ethnicity, simply asked a question: how worried are you about climate change? And 30% of the people polled said they were very worried, and another 36% said they were somewhat worried. So it's a significant issue for a majority of Americans. Another important study that looked at this came out in Lancet, the British Medical Journal, about a year and a half ago. This was a study of 10,000 subjects. They were young people aged 16 to 25. And this study was done throughout the world. There were 1,000 subjects in each of the countries on the slide here, which is a pretty good broad representation of the modern industrialized world. And when they asked these subjects, how worried are you about climate change, these are results they got. Almost 60% said they were extremely worried or very worried. So, it's possible this is an even bigger issue for younger people than it is for older adults now. The percentage of the worriers who felt that the worry was having a significant impact on their functioning was 45%. And this is actually one of the criteria for a mental disorder, is that the symptoms have to have a significant impact on functioning. So, it's possible that up to 45% of the people in this study actually met some type of diagnostic criteria for a mental condition. Another question they asked these young people was, are you feeling any of the following regard to climate change? And almost 2/3 of them said they were feeling at least one of these emotional states due to climate change: sadness, helplessness, anxiety, feeling afraid, being pessimistic, being angry about the situation, feeling guilty about their role in it, being ashamed about that, feeling hurt, depressed, grieving the situation, or feeling powerless. And then perhaps the most disturbing finding of all in this study was that when they asked these young people if they were considering, or if they were going to hesitate to have children because of climate change, almost 40% said they were. And this was very consistent across all the countries in this study. So throughout the world, climate change is, or just the thought of climate change and the worry about climate change is causing significant distress. This was a headline article from the New York Times from about a year and a half ago, talking about how therapists are beginning to hear about, patients that they're seeing describing anxiety and depression due to thoughts about climate change. This is becoming more and more common now, especially as concern over the COVID crisis is waning. So it's a real issue out there. Now, the members of the behavioral health work group at the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action were very concerned about this, and we wanted to try and come up with some recommendations for New Hampshire therapists of how to deal with this when their patients start presenting with climate-related issues. And, we looked at what data was out there. There really are no good controlled studies yet of what type of treatment or intervention is clearly helpful for eco-anxiety, but there's a lot of anecdotal reports and a lot of reports of people just describing what they're doing. So we kind of collated all those into a brief paper that we wrote, which you can find on our website, of what types of interventions people are using and what types of interventions people think are helping. So I just want to go over that, briefly now. The first thing that most people said is it's very important when people describe distress related to climate change that you not make them feel like they're sick or that they have a mental illness. That feeling anxiety, discouragement, despair, hopelessness due to the climate crisis is a normal response to what is going on out there. So it's very important that people not be made to feel like they, have a serious condition or that they're sick because of this. It's important to reinforce that these are normal responses. The next thing that people feel is important to do is really in the realm of cognitive therapy, which is to help people see the climate change situation in the least negative light possible, and to help them catastrophize less about it and think about it in a way that can be more helpful. And one thing to talk about is that climate change and energy technology are both very complex fields. And, despite all the dire predictions out there, there's no way anybody can really predict what the future is going to be, because there's too much about it that we don't know still, both in terms of what the current factors are going to lead to and what new discoveries and technologies may come about that are going to help solve this problem. It's also important to help people see that, it's not up to them or any other one person to solve this crisis, that it's a situation where people need to work together with others to work for positive change. And it's also important to, help people see that there is reason for hope, that new discoveries are being made, significant gains have already been made, the cost of solar has come way down, battery storage is now feasible so that solar technology can actually be implemented as a major source of energy. And there are probably other significant, technological advances that will be made that will help in solving this problem. Some people also indicate that they use an idea that comes out of chaos theory, which is that in any complex system, very small actions can sometimes have profound effects that are hard to predict. And it's helpful to get people to understand this notion so that they feel that any small improvement could potentially make a big difference down the line. So generally, the idea here is to help patients see that they're not living in a disaster, but rather striving for a future if they choose to get positively involved in the situation. The next thing that most people talk about is helping people develop techniques for resilience, making them stronger in the face of stress, helping improve their mental and physical health generally so that they can best deal with the climate crisis. And this includes a variety of techniques, relaxation training, mindfulness training, which has become quite widely used recently, encouraging people to strengthen spiritual beliefs, meditation, assertiveness training. All of these can be very helpful in terms of strengthening a patient's mental health resilience. Also, it's very helpful to tell people to make sure they're eating a healthy diet, to help with their general physical health, and to exercise regularly. And another thing that a lot of people have found to be very helpful is encouraging people to experience the natural world, or to develop a biophilia, or a love for the living world. And this seems to be very helpful in terms of people's overall health, outlook and their general physical health. And people can be encouraged to do anything that gets them outdoors, hiking, kayaking or canoeing, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, going to the beach, going to the beach again, or simply just, finding a beautiful place outdoors and enjoying it. Now, with the changes that we've seen this summer in terms of the heat, humidity, and the air pollution from the wildfires, it may be getting harder to do this in the summer than it has been, and people are going to need to, be encouraged to do these sorts of things all year round when the environment is a little more allowing for it. And just some evidence of how this works. I bet that a lot of you just kind of feel a little more relaxed or a little better seeing these outdoor pictures after watching all this black and white verbiage on the screen that's been going on. Another thing that is very helpful in helping people deal with their eco-anxiety is encouraging strong social support networks. This can be through family, friends, faith groups, neighbors, any social supports that the person has available. Some people are choosing to get involved in climate-oriented support groups. This isn't necessary, but some people find these quite helpful, and they tend to be very good, especially in terms of helping people feel like they're not alone with their eco-anxiety. I've put the names of 5 different ones up here on the screen, which can be easily accessed just by putting their names into a Google search. All of these groups have both Zoom meetings and live in-person meetings, and they can be a source for social support for some people. These are not action-oriented groups. They don't really get involved in doing too much about climate change, but they do provide helpful social support for a lot of people. And finally, the consensus of almost everybody working in the field that the most helpful thing for people that are distressed about climate change is getting involved in purposeful action about climate change. And this can be done either in an individual way or through a group. Individual types of actions are things like reducing fossil fuel use by making your home more energy efficient, reducing car and plane travel, using electric vehicles, and reducing consumption of meat and dairy products. It's very helpful for some people to actually start doing these things if they're not already. But the one most helpful way is through group action and getting involved in a group that is actively working on trying to fix climate change. I've put the names of some groups up here, which I think represent a good spectrum of possibilities for people to get involved in. There are many climate groups now. I'm sure they probably number in the hundreds because they seem to be growing every day. So there's no difficulty finding them. These are some of the ones that I think are some of the better ones out there. And again, I think represent a large spectrum that could, satisfy just about anybody's interest. 350.org is one of the oldest climate groups. This was founded by Bill McKibben about 30 or 40 years ago. It's a general group. It has both a national organization and state organizations. The group in New Hampshire is called 350 NH. And they are involved in various climate activities. They usually go to rallies. They're usually involved in political activities. Some of the 350 groups, including the New Hampshire group, are involved in promoting climate-sensitive political candidates. So they're really kind of a good all-around group, and they tend to have a lot of young people, but also some old geezers like me are involved in this group as well. The Citizens Climate Lobby is primarily interested in trying to get a carbon tax passed. And they are heavily involved in both state and federal lobbying to try and make this happen. So if that's somebody's interest, they're a good group to go to. ClearPath is one of the few climate groups that is very conservatively based politically. There are a lot of Republicans in this group and business people, and they are trying to approach climate change from a conservative perspective. So if somebody is of that political persuasion, this is a good group to steer them towards. The Environmental Voting Project is primarily involved in trying to get young people registered to vote and in promoting climate-sensitive candidates. Extinction Rebellion is the most radical of the groups on this list. They originated in England, but now have a fairly strong presence in the United States. These are the folks who have been crazy gluing themselves to art masterpieces as a way of bringing attention to the climate problem. They're involved in other, very kind of upfront, in-your-face political activities. So if, somebody is a young radical, this is a good group for them to go to. National Resource Defense Council is primarily involved in legal activities around climate change. No Coal, No Gas is a local New England group that is been trying very hard to shut down the coal plant in Bow, New Hampshire, the last active coal plant in New England. They're also involved in lots of rallies and political activities, tend to have a fairly left-wing orientation. The Sierra Club, I'm sure most people have heard of. They're, probably the oldest group on this list. They've been a very strong environmental group for many years and are involved in lots of good, important climate action. So if somebody wants to be a member of a large active group, this is a good one to steer them towards. Third Act is Bill McKibben's latest endeavor. This is a climate action group that is oriented towards senior citizens. I don't know if you have to be over 65 to be in it, but most people are. So if you have, a senior person who's wanting to get involved with other seniors, this is a good group to direct them towards. Now, unfortunately, we are not going to be able to help everybody that is a victim of climate disasters or everybody that has climate anxiety by having them go to individual therapists, to social workers and psychiatrists and psychologists. There simply aren't enough mental health professionals to be able to see the number of people that are going to be affected by these issues. This is a schematic diagram which kind of puts this in visual meaning for the United States. Each of the states is represented by one of these hexagons, and they're of varying colors depending on the ease of access of mental health care in the state. These light colored states here have the best access. It's estimated that no more than 5% of the people in these states have difficulty accessing adequate mental health care. As the colors get darker and darker, the situation gets more and more dismal. So, these states here that are kind of medium green in color, 50% of the residents of these states are unable to obtain adequate mental health care. And then as you go further west and get into these blue and black states, it's even worse. Wyoming is the worst of all, where it's estimated that no more than 5% of the state's population has access to adequate mental health care. And this is the United States, where access to mental health care is probably better than anywhere in the world. So we've got a real problem in that there's going to be way more people who need mental health help with the climate changes that are coming about than there are mental health professionals to be able to provide it. So to be able to address this, the idea of transformational resilience has been growing in the mental health field. And transformational resilience is an attempt to help people deal with primarily climate change, but also any type of traumatic event by educating people on a community-wide basis to help them build their capacity to withstand trauma and move forward from it by learning. So this is done by actually, holding large groups in communities and providing educational sessions and other types of educational materials and experience so that large groups of people are helped at one time, and also hopefully more in a preventative way before the climate trauma hits them. And there are three primary aspects to transformational resilience: trauma-informed skills, presencing skills, and purposing skills. And you'll see as we go through them, they're very similar to the types of interventions we were talking about that are being used in individual therapy. So the ideas are the same, but they're presented more on a community-wide basis with a slightly different orientation. So the trauma-informed skills involve educating people on basic information on how trauma and stress affect the mind and body, and also basic information on how trauma and stress affect the behavior of groups, what people in groups are likely to do if they experience a significant climate trauma, and how that can be detrimental and how that can sometimes be helpful. And also helping people be aware of the symptoms of stress in themselves and in others. The presencing skills involve emotional self-regulation. These are the resilience skills that we talked about for individuals, things like meditation, relaxation training, mindfulness, those sorts of things. Also helping build strong personal, social, and ecological supports is part of the presencing skills. Again, that reflects what we talked about for individuals as well in terms of them building up their social supports. And finally, cognitive awareness, which refers to the cognitive restructuring that we talked about that's being done for people on an individual basis. This can also be done fairly easily in a group setting. Finally, the purposing skills, again, involve the same sorts of things we talked about for individuals, getting people actively engaged in groups. These can be groups that are dealing with climate change issues. They can also be groups around finding housing, finding adequate food for people, any type of group activity that helps, group survival. Reframing of traumatic experiences. This again is kind of more of a cognitive skill. Helping people make individual and group decisions based on their values. So, what one community is going to do in response to a climate event may not be the same as another community. And also, helping harvest hope in people around the climate situation, that this is not going to be the end of the world. The main group that's been promoting this approach is the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. And this was founded by Bob Doppelt, very interesting guy who is really the the grand old man of transformational resilience at this point. And they have a website which goes by this address, where you can go to find more information about this. One of the main endeavors of this group at the moment is trying to get a bill passed in the US Congress called the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act. This bill has been introduced in the House back in October and in the Senate in December. And the bill would establish funding through the CDC for community-based programs designed to address mental health issues of the climate crisis. So they're really trying to pitch this to members of Congress now, and the hope is that our dysfunctional Congress will somehow find a way to get together on a bipartisan basis and pass this bill. It would be really wonderful and game-changing if that were to happen. Another thing that's happening in the transformational resilience area on a worldwide basis is a group called COP2, which stands for Care of the People and Planet. This is an international group of mental health and climate experts, and their goal is by 2030 to increase climate resiliency of basically half the population of the Earth. So by 2030, there's going to be 8 billion people on Earth, and they're hoping to reach 4 billion to improve their resiliency to climate change, because that's the estimate of the percentage of the Earth that's going to be severely affected by climate change. And it's not exactly clear how they're going to accomplish this, but it's similar to the other transformational resilience group in this country. The hope is to be able to provide community education on a worldwide basis to help strengthen people's resources in this regard. This group was given the charge to do this at the COP27 conference. They have to keep your COPs straight here. This is a different COP, which refers to the United Nations Conference of the Parties, which is the annual UN climate change meeting that's happening every year now. Last was in Egypt in November of 2022. This group went to the leaders of the UN conference and said, you guys aren't talking much about mental health. It's a real issue. We have to prepare the world for this and be able to help them deal with it. And much to their surprise, the leaders at the COP27 conference said, you're absolutely right. We're hereby, giving you the charge to go out and do this. So, they've been given support and funding to go do this, and, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. It's a pretty big undertaking. You can find out more about this group at their website, which goes under this address here. Finally, there's one more thing I'd like to talk about, that's happening in the world of climate change and health and mental health, and that's in the legal area. There was just recently a case that was tried in Montana, Held versus the state of Montana. And this was the first climate-related constitutional lawsuit to go to trial in the United States. This was a suit that was filed in 2020 by 16 people aged 2 to 18. And this suit alleges that the state of Montana, through support of the fossil fuel industry, has deprived them of their right to a clean and healthy environment, which is actually literally guaranteed by the Montana Constitution in those words. And so they're seeking to require Montana to develop a remedial plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The trial was held June 12th to 15th. It was on Zoom for the whole world to watch. I don't know if any of you, were able to see any of it, but it was fascinating. They had experts in climate testifying throughout the week about the effects of global warming. One of the experts that was testifying for the people bringing the suit was Lise Van Susteren, who is a psychiatrist in the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. And she was testifying about the emotional toll on the plaintiffs in the case when they recognize what lies in their future, and was using the term pre-traumatic stress to describe this. And that's a term that you may start hearing more about now as a way of describing what people are going through when they think about what the world's going to be like in the future. So the trial was before a judge. We are now awaiting the judge's decision in this case. It should be very interesting, and hopefully it'll be coming out any day now. There's a couple more cases like this that are bouncing around. One is Navahine F versus the Hawaii Department of Transportation. This was filed just last year by 14 young Hawaiians, alleging similarly to the Montana case that their constitutional rights to live healthful lives are being violated by greenhouse gas emissions. And they're asking the court to mandate that the state achieve zero emissions by 2045. This case will be going to trial on September 26th, so it should be very interesting to see what happens in this case. Finally, there is one federal case in federal courts, Juliana versus the United States. This actually started way back in 2015 when 21 young people filed in the Oregon federal court district that the US government actions have caused climate change, violating their rights to life, liberty, and property. This has been banging around for like 8 years now with motions and counter motions. The Department of Justice has continually tried to quash this case. In just this past June 1st, the case was allowed to proceed by the federal district judge. But then 3 weeks later, the US Department of Justice filed another motion to dismiss the case. So it's unclear, where this case is going to be going. So that's about all that I was going to say tonight. If anybody would like to get in touch with me, this is my email address. Be happy to correspond with you. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Leon for the questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fetter, for that comprehensive and in-depth presentation. I imagine it's not always easy to communicate such stark statistics that can be bleak. And one thing that's always on my mind about this is, from an equity and kind of from a deep place of care in my heart for people in society who have the least amount of resources to address any sort of challenges in their life. Who has the least access to air conditioning and electricity to bear the brunt of these problems. So it is an equity issue when we know it's a threat amplifier. So all the pre-existing issues in our society are going to be amplified for the people that are already experiencing them the worst. And so when we think about solutions, I really hope we keep in mind that, it isn't spread equally, the impacts of this, and communities on the front lines of these issues are going to be hit the worst and first in many cases. And so I really appreciate your comprehensive overview of all that. I think the first question I have, and there's a question in the chat, and if you have more, please do, is just how are you feeling about this all today, Dr. Fetter? Like, what is your emotional landscape look like when you're thinking about the climate crisis and giving a presentation on this? Like, how are you managing it?
Well, I managed it by joining a lot of climate groups. I've been thinking about climate change for many years and, dreading what was going to happen. Throughout, most of that time, I was very busy with my practice and, kind of had a commitment to my patients at that point, and just kind of kept the climate issue in the back of my mind. But when I decided to retire, it was partially to be able to, stop thinking about climate change and start doing something about it. And I've joined a large number of climate groups, and it's taking up most of my time now. And that's how I'm dealing with it, by getting involved and, having too much going on to, stop and worry about it.
Oh, well, I commend you for that, and thank you. I know myself and younger generations know this is an all hands on deck issue. So thank you for all your work you're doing. We have one question from Matthew in the chat that says, you mentioned purposeful action as a tool to manage climate stress. Although this could also lead to more mental burdens, Can you discuss any evidence for the effectiveness of reducing exposure to negative climate stories or media? Do you recommend media avoidance in any specific ways to your patients?
I don't recommend that, unless, somebody is saying that, watching the news is just so distressing to them. It really wasn't an issue until this summer, because the media really weren't covering this a whole lot up until this summer. With the fires in Canada and the extreme heat in the southern part of the United States, there's been a huge increase in the amount of media coverage of this now compared to what it used to be. And how much distress this is causing people, I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any good data on this. And I think, it's really an individual issue that people have to judge for themselves. And if you're trying to help another person, you have to, try and judge the person's capacity for, dealing with data versus, being active and working on it. So I think it's a real individual thing, and it's not something that I would generally advise people to avoid, media coverage.
Yeah, thank you for that response. And the Climate Mental Health Network is actively working with Hollywood and other kind of media producing agencies, because I think we need to put the onus on the communicators of this information to not be creating, we know how psychology works, and threat amplifying information gets more clicks. And it's like part of the responsibility of media agencies to be reporting in ways that are most healthy for populations. And so this is a big piece of work in how media communicates. Just as there's been a transformation in how the media communicates about suicide and suicidality, there needs to be a shift in how media communicates about the climate crisis in a way that's supportive. And so this is an advocacy effort as well, I think, for groups in thinking about that, because it has public health impacts in terms of the way it's communicated. I'm just going to check the chat again to see if there's any other questions. There's one question for you. It's a technical question about the court cases you mentioned, and if you know about the group Earth Justice representing any of the parties in those cases.
I don't know if Earth Justice was involved. It's possible. I know they all had, they all had very top-notch lawyers working with them. And I'm sure that they do have climate groups that are involved, but I can't say, specifically about Earth Justice's involvement.
Okay, thank you. I'll give people a moment. Is there anybody who's on video that has a question? I have a few more, which I'll happily give, but I just want to open the floor to see if there's anybody else. We have time for about one more question before we close. Here's a comment from David Hughes. Last year, a man immolated himself on the steps of the Supreme Court in order to draw attention to the need to shut down coal. What are your thoughts on that sort of action? That was an individual choice and how they saw the issue, I would say. I think that person was from actually Boulder, Colorado, if you remember that case specifically, Dr. Fetter.
Well, I think it's a tragic thing that anybody thinks of going to that length to make a point, but this person obviously did and felt that deeply about the situation. I hope for his sake that it did have some positive effect, but I certainly hope that most people are able to demonstrate their concern and come up with productive action in a less violent way.
Thank you for that. Oh, I think we can squeeze in one more question. Just came in from the chat from Beverly. Do you recommend open forums where people can share their stories of how climate has impacted them personally?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's very helpful for people to be able to talk about these sorts of things in a group. It works in a number of ways. It helps provide catharsis for the person telling their story if they feel they have not been able to tell it to people previously. I think it helps everyone in the group feel that they're not alone with their climate stress and the things that they have been going through. And, hopefully it also serves as a basis to provide some kind of meaningful positive action. So absolutely, I think people getting together in groups to talk about these things is very helpful, and I encourage it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Fetter. I mean, I hope the space of talking about it today was healing and supportive of everybody who's been living through these issues and supporting patients who are dealing with a range of emotions and experiences related to the climate crisis. And so from my side, I just want to thank everybody for being here today and joining us. And thank you, Dr. Fetter, for the excellent presentation and for your wisdom and your work on this issue. I will express my thanks for having me join you today, and then I'll pass it over to Emily.
Great. Thank you, Liam, so much for being such a wonderful and attentive moderator. We really appreciate your joining us and the Climate Mental Health Network being supportive of New Hampshire healthcare workers for climate action. Thank you so much, Dr. Fader, for your awesome presentation. We all really enjoyed it. Dr. Fetter is the chair of our behavioral health working group at NH HWCA. So if you have any interest in learning more about what that group does or joining our monthly meetings, we'd be happy to have you join. I will send some information in a follow-up email tomorrow, as well as the information for continuing education credits if those